The art teacher crouched. Beside 8-year-old Ethan was wearing $15,000 worth of accessories to teach finger painting. Marcus Brooks felt his blood turn cold as he watched this woman in Louboutin heels and a Cartier watch accept his son's crayon drawing with paint-stained fingers. When Ethan innocently asked if Miss Sarah could come to dinner, the woman's smile froze. Her eyes darted to Marcus, standing outside the window, and for one unguarded moment, her expression revealed something dangerous: recognition. Marcus had learned the hard way that beautiful strangers with expensive secrets were never just passing through. What he didn't know was that this particular woman had been hunting for them for months, carrying a truth that would either destroy his world or save it. Marcus pushed through the doors of the Riverside Community Center with quiet authority that came from 2 years of single parenting. Ethan looked up from his painting, face lighting up with pure joy that still caught Marcus off guard. The boy had his mother's smile, and it never failed to punch a hole through Marcus's chest. "Dad, look what I made." Ethan held up a crayon drawing of their apartment, complete with wooden furniture Marcus had built by hand. "Miss Sarah helped me with the shadows. She said you must be really talented." The woman beside Ethan straightened slowly. Mid-30s, auburn hair in what looked casual but probably cost $200 to achieve. Her jeans fit perfectly because they were tailored, not off the rack. Everything screamed money, except the genuine warmth when she looked at his son. "You must be Ethan's father," she said, extending a hand, with no wedding ring but a tennis bracelet worth 3 months' rent. "I'm Sarah Wilson. I've been volunteering here for a few months." Marcus shook her hand briefly, noting the softness of manicures versus his own calluses. "Marcus Brooks. Thanks for working with Ethan. He's been through a lot." Something flickered across Sarah's face at his name, so quick he almost missed it. But Marcus had learned to read people the hard way when everyone had opinions about raising his son. Sarah Wilson knew his name, and that knowledge sat on her like an uncomfortable secret. The drive home filled with Ethan's chatter about art techniques and color theory, words too sophisticated for a second grader but natural from his son's mouth. Marcus wondered where a community center volunteer had learned such expertise. Most workers were retired teachers or college students earning hours. Sarah Wilson fit neither category. Her knowledge was too deep, her techniques too advanced for someone just dabbling in art education. That evening, as Marcus tucked Ethan into bed, the boy dropped the inevitable question. "Dad, can Miss Sarah come to dinner this weekend? She said she's never had homemade spaghetti and meatballs." Marcus felt familiar tightness in his chest whenever someone tried entering their carefully constructed world. "Buddy, we don't really know her. She's just your art teacher." Ethan's eyes grew serious in that way that made him look older than his years. "But she's really nice, Dad. She has a pretty laugh and seems lonely, like we used to be before we became a team." The honesty hit Marcus like a physical blow. They had been lonely, desperately so, in those first months after Emma's death. Only recently had their apartment started feeling like home again, instead of a museum of grief. But something about Sarah Wilson set off every protective alarm bell Marcus had developed. That night, Marcus found himself researching someone online for the first time in months. Sarah Wilson, art teacher, yielded nothing useful. But something nagged about her reaction to his name, her expensive clothes, her hesitation when Ethan asked about dinner. He expanded his search until he stumbled across something that made his stomach drop. Sarah Mitchell, CEO of TechStart Solutions, looked exactly like Sarah Wilson, volunteer art teacher. The Forbes article was 6 months old, featuring 30 under 30 tech leaders changing the game. The woman in expensive suit and perfect makeup was unmistakably the same person who'd spent Friday afternoon teaching his son perspective and shading. But it was the company name that made Marcus's hands shake. TechStart Solutions was a subsidiary of Mitchell Group. The same Mitchell Group that had destroyed his life 2 years ago. The same company whose founder, Thomas Mitchell, had fired Marcus 3 days after Emma's funeral, claiming he was unreliable and emotionally compromised. The man who'd blacklisted him from every major construction firm in Portland, forcing Marcus to scrape together a living with odd jobs and custom furniture. Sarah Mitchell was Thomas Mitchell's daughter, and she'd been teaching his son art for 3 months. Marcus closed the laptop with a snap that echoed through the quiet apartment. His first instinct was to pack and leave Portland that night. His second was to confront her, but looking at Ethan's drawing on the refrigerator, with its careful attention to shadow and light, he realized something chilling. She was good at this, really good, and Ethan had been happier these past months than since Emma died. The weekend came faster than Marcus wanted. He'd spent 3 days crafting excuses, planning ways to discourage Ethan from this friendship. But every argument died when he saw the excitement in his son's eyes. Ethan had planned the menu, cleaned his room, and drawn a welcome card. Saturday evening arrived with autumn chill that made their small apartment feel cozy rather than cramped. Marcus had reluctantly agreed to dinner, making clear this was one time only. He was stirring sauce when the doorbell rang, and Ethan raced to answer before Marcus could stop him. "Miss Sarah, you came!" Ethan's voice carried pure joy of a child whose faith in adult promises had been rewarded. Marcus wiped his hands and walked to the living room, where Sarah stood looking around with an unreadable expression. She'd dressed down, jeans and sweater that probably cost more than Marcus made in a week, but she'd made an effort. She held a bakery box from Pearl's Patisserie, where a dozen cupcakes cost what Marcus spent on groceries for 3 days. "I hope chocolate is okay," she said, offering the box to Ethan. "The lady said these were their best." Ethan took the box with careful reverence. "Dad makes really good chocolate chip cookies," Ethan said, with son's loyalty defending his father's honor. "But these look fancy." Marcus studied Sarah's face as she smiled at Ethan's diplomatic response. Something genuine was there, not the calculated deception he'd expected. She seemed nervous, almost shy, taking in their modest living room with handmade furniture and carefully arranged family photos. "Your father made all of this?" she asked, running fingers along the coffee table edge. "Dad can build anything," Ethan said proudly. "He made my bed, bookshelf, and kitchen table. Mom used to say his hands could make magic out of wood." Sarah's expression shifted at Emma's mention, something raw flickering across her features before she composed herself. "Your mom sounds like she was very wise." Dinner passed smoother than Marcus expected, though he remained watchful for signs Sarah was fishing for information. Instead, she seemed genuinely interested in Ethan's school stories and drawings. She asked thoughtful questions about his art, encouraged him to explain techniques, and listened with attention that made Ethan glow with pride. When Ethan spilled sauce, she helped clean without embarrassing him. When he struggled cutting meatballs, she quietly adjusted his knife angle. Only when Ethan excused himself to use the bathroom did the careful politeness crack. "You know who I am," Sarah said quietly, not looking at Marcus as she helped clear plates. Marcus set down the serving bowl with deliberate care. "Sarah Mitchell, CEO of TechStart Solutions, daughter of the man who fired me while my wife was dying." The words hung between them like a challenge. Sarah stopped moving, hands frozen around the plates she'd been gathering. "Yes," she said simply. "Why?" Marcus's voice was low, controlled, but Sarah flinched as if he'd shouted. "Why are you here? What do you want with my son?" Sarah set plates down and turned to face him, and Marcus was startled to see tears gathering. "I wanted to meet you, both of you. I've been trying to find a way for months." Her voice barely above a whisper, carrying weight of something eating at her. "Congratulations. You found us. Was it worth it? Getting your kicks playing dress-up with the people your father destroyed?" "You don't understand." Sarah's voice cracked slightly. "My father, he was wrong. What he did to you was wrong." Marcus laughed without humor. "Wrong? Lady, your father didn't just fire me. He made sure I couldn't get work anywhere in this city. Do you know what it's like to lose your wife and livelihood in the same month? I know because I fought him on it." Sarah's voice was stronger now, edged with her own anger. "I was 29, working as his operations manager, and I told him you didn't deserve what he was doing. He said business was business." Her hands were shaking, and Marcus could see this conversation was costing her something real. "And that's supposed to make me feel better?" he asked, though his anger was beginning to crack around the edges. "No." Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing careful makeup. "Nothing can make that better. But when I became CEO last year, I started looking into every controversial firing my father had authorized. Your case was the worst. Marcus stared at her, trying to process what she was telling him. So this is what, some charity project? Make yourself feel better about daddy's sins by teaching the poor widower's kid art? It started that way, Sarah admitted, and Marcus felt his worst suspicions confirmed. I planned to offer you a job, a real one with benefits and salary that would let you build a better life for Ethan, but then I started actually teaching him and… Her voice trailed off, looking toward the hallway where they could hear Ethan humming. And what? Marcus prompted, though part of him already knew. And I realized he's extraordinary. Not just talented, Marcus, extraordinary. And you… She gestured around the apartment, taking in carefully crafted furniture, how everything fit with mathematical precision. You're raising him to be kind and thoughtful and genuine in a world that doesn't value those things. I didn't expect that. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. What exactly did you expect? Sarah was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I expected to hate you. My father spent the last 2 years of his life consumed with regret about his business decisions. He died 6 months ago, and his last words to me were about the people he'd wronged. Your name was at the top of that list. The bathroom door opened, and Ethan's footsteps echoed down the hallway. Sarah straightened quickly, wiping away the last traces of tears. I should go, she said quietly. Miss Sarah, are you okay? Ethan appeared in the doorway, young face creased with concern. The boy had uncanny ability to pick up on adult emotions, a skill developed during Emma's illness, when grown-ups tried so hard to hide their fear. I'm fine, sweetheart. I just remembered I have an early morning tomorrow. Her voice was steady, but Marcus could hear the effort it took. Ethan's face fell. But we didn't have dessert yet, and I wanted to show you my room. Marcus watched Sarah struggle with herself, and he saw the exact moment she decided to leave her own discomfort behind for Ethan's sake. Maybe just for a few minutes, she said, forcing a smile. The transformation was remarkable. Whatever personal turmoil she was dealing with disappeared behind genuine interest in his son. Ethan's room was a shrine to his artistic development. Drawings covered every wall space, showing clear progression from childhood scribbles to sophisticated work he was producing now. Sarah moved through the space with careful attention of someone who understood what she was seeing. She paused at each piece, asking questions about technique and inspiration, treating Ethan's work with respect she might show professional gallery pieces. This is your most recent work, she asked, stopping before a charcoal drawing of Emma that took Marcus's breath away every time he saw it. I drew it from memory, Ethan said proudly. Dad doesn't like to talk about Mom, but I don't want to forget her face. Marcus felt Sarah's eyes on him, but he couldn't meet her gaze. The truth was, talking about Emma hurt too much, and he'd convinced himself avoiding the subject protected Ethan from more pain. She's beautiful, Sarah said softly. You can see how much you love her in the way you drew her eyes. There was something in her voice, recognition of loss, that made Marcus look at her more carefully. Do you have family pictures, Miss Sarah? Ethan asked with straightforward curiosity. Sarah was quiet so long that Marcus finally looked at her. She was staring at the drawing with profound sadness she'd managed to keep hidden until now. I was married once, she said finally. But we didn't make it work. That's sad, Ethan said with straightforward sympathy. Maybe you could draw pictures of the good times, like I do with Mom. Something broke in Sarah's carefully composed expression. That's very wise advice, Ethan. Marcus could see that his son had unknowingly touched on something painful, some parallel loss that Sarah carried. The evening ended with awkward politeness and promises to see each other at the next art class. But as Marcus watched Sarah walk to her BMW that cost more than he'd made in 2 years, he realized their world had shifted in ways he couldn't quite understand yet. The woman who'd just spent the evening in their home wasn't the villain he'd expected. She was something more complicated. Someone carrying her own grief and guilt, trying to find a way to make amends for damage she hadn't directly caused. Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus found himself paying closer attention to Ethan's descriptions of art class. His son mentioned that Miss Sarah had brought professional-grade supplies, talked about visiting European art museums, seemed to know unusual amounts about running a business. Small details painted a picture of someone living a double life, but more than that, Marcus noticed changes in Ethan. The boy was more confident, more willing to take creative risks, more articulate about his artistic choices. But it was Ethan's artwork that forced Marcus to confront the truth he'd been avoiding. His son's drawings had always been good, but under Sarah's guidance they'd become something approaching professional quality. The boy was developing techniques that would have taken years to learn alone. More importantly, he was learning to see the world through an artist's eyes, finding beauty and meaning in ordinary moments. It was the kind of gift money couldn't buy, and Sarah was giving it freely. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday when Marcus arrived early to pick up Ethan from class. Through the window, he watched Sarah working with kids whose backgrounds were clearly as challenging as Ethan's. She moved between them with infinite patience, offering encouragement and technical guidance with equal measure. There was nothing performative about her interaction with these children. She genuinely cared about their development, celebrating small victories and gently correcting mistakes without crushing enthusiasm. Marcus was so absorbed watching that he almost missed the conversation between two other parents. "That Sarah's something special, isn't she?" one woman said. "My daughter's never had a teacher pay for supplies out of their own pocket before." The other parent nodded. "I heard she's been trying to get the city to fund an after-school program. She's writing grant applications on her own time." Marcus felt something shift in his chest. This wasn't charity or guilt. This was genuine commitment. At night, he made a decision that surprised him. Instead of avoiding Sarah at the next class, he arrived early and asked if they could talk. They sat in the empty classroom while Ethan worked on a project in the hallway, silence stretching between them like a bridge neither was sure they wanted to cross. The smell of tempera paint and childhood creativity hung in the air, a reminder of positive things Sarah was bringing into these kids' lives. "I owe you an apology," Marcus said finally. Sarah looked up from the paintbrushes she'd been organizing. "You don't owe me anything." Her voice was careful, as if afraid too much emotion might scare him away. "Yes, I do. I've been watching you with these kids, and I can see that what you're doing here is real. It's not about your father, or me, or some corporate guilt trip. You actually care about them." "I do," Sarah said simply. "Why? You could hire someone to run a dozen programs like this." "Why get your hands dirty teaching finger painting to 8-year-olds? Marcus leaned forward, genuinely curious now rather than suspicious. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice carried weight that made Marcus understand he was hearing something she rarely shared. "Because I spent 15 years in boardrooms and corner offices, making decisions that affected thousands of people I never met, and I realized I'd never actually touched anyone's life in a way that mattered." She gestured toward the hallway where Ethan was working. "These kids, when I teach them to see light and shadow, when I watch them figure out how to make their imagination visible on paper, I'm part of something real for the first time in my adult life." Marcus felt something inside him unlock, tension he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. "Ethan thinks you're lonely." Sarah's laugh was rueful. "Ethan is wise beyond his years." The admission hung between them, neither comfortable nor entirely unwelcome. "He is. And he's right, isn't he? You are lonely." Marcus found himself leaning into the conversation rather than away from it, surprised by his own willingness to be direct. "Aren't we all, in some way?" Sarah's response was a question that seemed to encompass more than just their current situation. Marcus considered this. "I thought I was protecting him by keeping our world small. After Emma died, it felt safer to just be the two of us against everything else. But watching him with you, he lights up in a way I haven't seen since before she got sick. He's a remarkable child, Marcus, but I think you know that." Sarah's voice was gentle, carrying none of the pity he'd learned to hate from other people. "I know he's everything good about his mother, and somehow none of the broken parts of me." The self-deprecation slipped out before he could stop it. "You're not broken," Sarah said quietly. "You're grieving. There's a difference." The conversation was interrupted by Ethan's excited voice from the hallway. "Dad, Miss Sarah, come look at what I made." They found him holding a watercolor painting of the three of them, sitting around Marcus's handmade dining table. The perspective was perfect, colors warm and inviting. But what caught Marcus's attention was the fourth chair at the table, empty but set with a place setting. The detail was so specific, so intentional, that it took his breath away. "That's for Mom," Ethan explained matter-of-factly. "Miss Sarah said families don't disappear just because someone dies. They just change shape." Marcus felt his throat tighten. She said that? The concept was so different from his own approach to grief, so much healthier than his instinct to pack Emma's memory away like her belongings. "Yeah, she said her dad taught her that before he died, that love doesn't end, it just finds new ways to show up." Marcus looked at Sarah, who was studying the painting with careful attention. "Your father told you that?" There was something in her expression, mixture of sadness and gratitude, that suggested this wisdom had come at a cost. "In one of our last conversations, he had a lot of regrets, but he also had a lot of wisdom he'd never shared before." She touched the corner of Ethan's painting gently. "I think he would have liked this very much." Walking to the car that evening, Ethan slipped his hand into Marcus's with casual affection of a child who'd never doubted his father's love. "Dad, do you think Miss Sarah would like to come to dinner again? I want to make her one of those chocolate chip cookies you taught me." The question was asked with assumption that of course she would be welcome, that the tensions Marcus had been wrestling with were invisible to his 8-year-old son. Marcus squeezed his son's hand, feeling something like hope stir in his chest for the first time in months. "I think she might like that very much, buddy." The words came out easier than expected, carrying a promise that surprised him with its sincerity. As they drove home through quiet Portland streets, Marcus realized that his carefully constructed world was about to get more complicated. But for the first time since Emma's death, complicated didn't necessarily feel dangerous. 3 months later, Marcus found himself standing in Sarah's downtown office, looking out at a view of Portland he'd never seen from this angle before. The contrast between this gleaming corporate space and the community center classroom where he'd first really seen her was stark. But somehow both spaces felt authentically hers. The office was decorated with artwork from her students, including several of Ethan's pieces, giving the professional space warmth that most corporate environments lack. "You don't have to do this," he said, turning away from the window to face her across the polished conference table. Sarah looked up from the contract between them, her expression serious. "Marcus, your furniture designs are extraordinary. The pieces you've made for your apartment, the custom work you've done for neighbors, you have a gift that's being wasted on odd jobs and repair work. It's not wasted if it keeps a roof over our heads." Marcus ran his fingers along the table edge, noting the quality of wood and precision of joinery. "But imagine what you could create if you had proper equipment, unlimited materials, and commissions from people who understand what they're buying." Sarah spread out sketches she'd commissioned from an architect. "This workshop space would be yours. No rent, no overhead, just a partnership where you create and I handle the business side." Marcus signed the contract that day, but not before adding a clause Sarah hadn't expected. 50% of all profits would go into a fund for arts education in local schools. "You don't need to do that," Sarah protested. "Yes, I do. Emma always said that gifts are meant to multiply, not just accumulate. If this works, other kids should benefit too." The decision felt right in a way that accepting charity never would have. The business partnership flourished in ways that surprised them both. Marcus's furniture, marketed through Sarah's connections and displayed in carefully curated galleries, found an audience hungry for authentic craftsmanship. But more importantly, their friendship deepened into something neither had expected to find. Sarah became a regular presence in their lives, joining them for Sunday dinners and helping Ethan with increasingly sophisticated art projects. She never tried to replace Emma's memory. Instead, she helped Ethan find ways to honor his mother through artwork. 6 months after the business partnership began, Marcus found himself working late in his new workshop when Sarah appeared with takeout from their favorite Thai restaurant. They ate sitting on sawhorses, surrounded by smell of wood shavings and warm glow of work lights. The informality felt right. Two people who'd learned to be comfortable in each other's presence without needing to maintain careful boundaries that had defined their early interaction. "Ethan's been asking me about dating," Marcus said without preamble. Sarah nearly choked on her pad thai. "What did you tell him?" The question came out higher than her normal speaking voice. "That grown-ups sometimes find special friends who become important to their families." Marcus set down his chopsticks and looked at her directly. "He asked if you counted as that kind of special friend?" And Sarah's voice was carefully neutral, but Marcus could see tension in her shoulders. "I told him I thought you might if that was something you wanted." Marcus felt his heart start racing with fear that he'd misread everything between them. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, and Marcus began to worry he'd just destroyed the most important relationship in his life since Emma's death. "Marcus," she said finally, "I need you to understand something. I didn't plan for this. Any of this. When I first started looking for you, it was about guilt and responsibility and trying to fix something my father had broken." Her voice was steady, but he could hear the effort it took to maintain control. "I know." The admission came out quietly, carrying all the weight of the journey they'd both taken to reach this moment. But somewhere along the way, it stopped being about that and started being about— she gestured helplessly around the workshop. "About this. About Ethan's laugh when he figures out a new technique. About watching you create something beautiful with your hands. About feeling like I belong somewhere for the first time in my adult life." The vulnerability in her voice was unmistakable, and Marcus felt something fundamental shift between them. Marcus stood up and moved closer to her, close enough to see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. "Emma used to say that love wasn't about deserving," he said quietly. "It was about recognizing when something good was trying to happen and having the courage to let it." The words felt like a bridge between his past and his future, honoring Emma's memory while acknowledging that his heart had room for someone new. "Are you asking me something, Marcus Brooks?" "I'm asking if you want to be part of this family. Really part of it. Not as my business partner or Ethan's art teacher, but as someone who chooses to stay even when things get difficult." The words hung in the air between them, carrying all the weight of everything they'd been through together. Sarah's answer was a kiss that tasted like possibility and hope, and the kind of future Marcus had stopped believing in. They told Ethan together the next morning over pancakes that Marcus made and Sarah attempted to flip with disastrous results. Their son listened with serious attention he gave to all important announcements, then nodded as if he'd been expecting this development all along. The kitchen was filled with comfortable chaos of a family weekend morning. Syrup spills and laughter and easy intimacy of people who'd chosen to share their lives. "Does this mean Miss Sarah will help me with my Mother's Day project at school?" he asked practically. "What kind of project?" Sarah asked, successfully flipping a pancake on her third attempt. "We're supposed to write about someone who takes care of us like a mom. I was going to write about Dad, but now I could write about both of you." Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion, but it was Sarah who spoke first. "I would be honored to be included in that project, Ethan. But you know I could never replace your mom, right?" Sarah's voice was careful, making sure he understood she wasn't trying to erase Emma's place in their family. Ethan considered this with 8-year-old seriousness. "Mom taught me that families can grow bigger without the love getting smaller. I think she'd like that you help take care of us now." A year later, Marcus stood in the same community center where he'd first seen Sarah, watching her work with a new group of young artists. The after-school program she'd fought to establish was thriving, funded by grants she'd written and donations from the furniture business that had exceeded everyone's expectations. Through the window, Marcus could see the new sign, the Emma Brooks Memorial Arts Center. It had been Ethan's suggestion, and Sarah had spent weeks working with the city to make it happen. As the evening wound down and parents arrived to collect their children, Sarah began the familiar routine of cleaning brushes and organizing supplies. Marcus joined her, their movements synchronized by months of shared tasks. "Good day?" he asked, noting the paint smudges on her jeans and satisfied exhaustion in her eyes. These were the moments he treasured most, the quiet satisfaction of work well done. "The best kind," she replied. Rosa finished her piece for the youth exhibition, and Tommy finally figured out perspective. The pride in her voice was unmistakable. Each small victory for one of her students felt personal to her. Our empire expands. Marcus's teasing was gentle, acknowledging how far they'd come from that first awkward dinner in his apartment. Our empire, Marcus corrected gently. Everything we've built together. They drove home through Portland's streets as the sun set behind the mountains, Ethan chattering about his latest project from the back seat. Their small apartment had been transformed over the past year into something that reflected all three of their personalities. Marcus's handcrafted furniture, Sarah's carefully chosen art pieces, and Ethan's drawings covering every available wall space. The space felt full without being cluttered, alive with creative energy of people actively building a life together. Dinner was a collaborative effort, with Sarah handling the salad, Marcus managing the pasta, and Ethan setting the table with careful precision he brought to everything he cared about. They ate by candlelight, not because it was romantic, but because Ethan had decided that families should make ordinary moments feel special. The conversation flowed easily between school events, business decisions, and plans for the weekend. "Miss Sarah," Ethan said as they cleared the plates, "will you help me write my essay for the art contest?" "What's the topic?" Sarah asked, stacking dishes with efficiency of someone who'd learned to be useful in a kitchen through necessity rather than natural talent. "We're supposed to write about someone who changed our life." Ethan grinned with mischievous expression that usually meant he was about to surprise the adults. "I'm writing about the art teacher who tried to be sneaky, but was really just lonely." Sarah nearly dropped the serving bowl. "Ethan!" Her embarrassment was real, but so was her laughter. "It's true," he protested. "You were trying to help us without telling us who you really were. That's sneaky, but it worked out because now we're a family and Dad smiles all the time instead of just when he thinks I'm not looking." The casual way he described their transformation struck both adults silent for a moment. Marcus caught Sarah's eye across the table, sharing one of those moments of perfect understanding that had become the foundation of their relationship. They'd found each other through deception and guilt, and the complicated legacy of Thomas Mitchell's mistakes. But they'd chosen to stay because of love and hope and the simple recognition that they were better together than apart. The journey from suspicion to trust to love hadn't been easy, but it had been worth every difficult conversation and moment of uncertainty. Later that evening, after Ethan had gone to bed clutching a new sketch pad Sarah had bought him, Marcus and Sarah sat on the couch he'd built, her head on his shoulder, as they went through the day's mail. Mixed in with bills and business correspondence was a letter from the Portland Arts Council, officially notifying them that their program had been selected for a statewide expansion. "We're going to need to hire more teachers," Sarah said, scanning the letter, "and find bigger spaces." The logistics were daunting, but Marcus could hear the excitement in her voice. "And write a lot more grant applications." The paperwork alone would be enormous, but they'd learn to tackle big projects by breaking them into manageable pieces. Marcus kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of paint and possibility that always seemed to cling to her hair. "Are you ready for that much success?" The question was playful, but he genuinely wanted to know if she was prepared for the level of responsibility that would come with expansion. "With you? I'm ready for anything." Her confidence was infectious, and Marcus found himself believing they could handle whatever challenges came their way. They'd already survived the hardest part, learning to trust each other despite everything that should have kept them apart. From Ethan's room came the soft sound of pencil on paper as their son worked on yet another drawing, probably inspired by something he'd observed that day. The sound had become the soundtrack of their evening routine, as familiar and comforting as Emma's lullabies had once been. It was the sound of creativity and concentration, of a child who felt safe enough to lose himself in his imagination. Marcus thought about the man he'd been 3 years ago, broken by loss and bitter about the injustices that had shaped his world. That man couldn't have imagined this life, the successful business, the meaningful relationship, the son who was thriving in ways that honored both his mother's memory and his own potential. But mostly, that man couldn't have imagined the peace that came from letting go of anger and choosing trust instead. "Marcus," Sarah's voice was soft, almost hesitant. "I love you, both of you, more than I ever thought I was capable of." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of someone who'd learned that love was a choice as much as a feeling. "We love you too," he replied simply. "All of us." The inclusion of Emma in that statement wasn't painful anymore, it was natural. Their family had expanded to include Sarah without diminishing Emma's place in their hearts. From the bedroom came Ethan's voice, calling out his nightly question. "Dad? Sarah? Are you still there?" It was a ritual that had developed gradually, the boy's need for reassurance that the adults in his life weren't going anywhere. "We're here, buddy," Marcus called back. "We're not going anywhere." The promise felt solid in a way that would have seemed impossible when he'd first learned Sarah's true identity. "Good," came the sleepy reply. "I'm drawing a picture of our future, and it's really, really good." Marcus smiled, pulling Sarah closer as they listened to their son's pencil scratching against paper, creating art from imagination and love, and the absolute certainty that tomorrow would be worth drawing. Outside, Portland glittered with possibilities they were only beginning to discover, but inside their small apartment, everything they needed was already there. Handmade furniture that would last for generations, walls covered with a child's vision of the world, and the quiet satisfaction of a family that had chosen each other against all odds. They'd learned that love, like art, was something that got more beautiful the more attention you paid to it.